This session is on identity. Identity in a previous century was often based on geographic and family ties. Evangelism then focused on engaging your neighbors and other close-by acquaintances. Evangelism was often conducted by canvassing a neighborhood, and churches were formed based on the demographics of those living around the church. In the 21st century, though, the acceleration of individualism, hence the highly esteemed value of privacy, has increased such that individuals often find their closest connections and identity based on networks tied to social media, to where they work, or to where they play, such as gyms, aerobic classes, etc. Geography does not necessarily define identity as it once did. For example, people often feel more closely connected to those that they regularly contact on social media who live 50 miles away, as opposed to those neighbors who live merely 50 feet away. This now provides an opportunity to explore evangelism opportunities through these new bridges of God as described by Donald McGavran. These are places of work, of play, and social media, whereby Donald McGavran noticed that the gospel most easily moves through relational networks in the lives of believers through a term that he called bridges of God. These are the places where you typically hang out, and are probably the best bridges to influence people for Christ. So today, where do these networks tend to form? Alan Hirsch recommends meeting people at third places where they often gather to socialize. Today in North America, many find their identities in groups that meet in coffee houses or bars or recreational places that are often, quote, more home-like than home, unquote. Sociologist Ray Oldenburg comments on the draw of third places when he says, "These exist on neutral ground and serve to level their guests to a condition of social equality. Within these places, conversation is the primary activity and the major vehicle for the display and appreciation of human personality and individuality. Those desiring to influence others for Christ may determine that they'll be more purposeful in the places where they have already formed networks. For those whose entire group identity exists within Christian fellowships, though, they may consider planning strategically to become active in third places that are not specifically focused upon Christ followers." Now, in addition to brick and mortar third places, adults may also gather in the 21st century through social media connections. Any discussion about networks today wouldn't be complete unless we considered the hallowed online community. This may be for the first time the most significant and most natural environment where people gather today, but not physically, particularly for those under age 40. The advantages of this form include the insights that one can think through and the responses that they provide more carefully. You can provide your audience with links to articles or persuasive memes and images that corroborate the message being conveyed. Now, Rick Richardson suggests that we ask ourselves these two questions to think about third spaces we may engage. First, what do I love to do, just naturally? And second, how could I do what I love with people who don't yet know Jesus? If you love skateboarding or bowling or jazz music or sailing or hunting, or there's 1,000 other things you can do, why not invest heavily in a group that shares your interest? In that scenario, the entry-level point of trying to establish a shared identity would already be resolved, and your time can therefore be spent doing what you love, establishing new relationships, and sharing another interest, i.e. your love for Jesus, with people who are a lot like you in at least one important area of life. For this week's activity, ask for 2 or 3 volunteers to do a role-play exercise. The role plays will help students think through some of the complexities they are likely to confront regarding identification concerns and places where they may actually encounter lost people. Ask students to bring authentic problems to the exercise that they actually struggled with currently or in the past. In particular, encourage them to consider the places where they work, where they play, or they engage others via social media. For example, one student role-played a workplace situation that involved gossiping and poor relationships with her employer, which were actually based upon real events. Another student role-played an experience with a fictitious cousin at a family gathering. It was actually, though, based on encounters he had with other relatives. Another example, an Asian student demonstrated how a family gathering in his country could be contextualized to favorably accommodate a conversation about the gospel. When two African students role-played a neighborhood encounter with a neighbor who was fearful and agitated because he perceived a curse had been placed upon him, this was based on encounters with neighbors who had expressed that sentiment in the past. So ask the students to write this on a piece of paper and hand in the scenario to two participants who then are asked to role play this encounter so the rest of the group can observe. After the role play, ask the role-playing students about their feelings and thought processes during the classroom encounter in order to gauge whether or not the experience had felt authentic to them. Ask if they felt that effective communication had occurred. This process may be somewhat difficult, particularly to initiate, as students often want to be quote-unquote nice or non-confrontational about the efforts of others. After a couple practice sessions, though, students often relax and recognize that their honest reactions expressed diplomatically and kindly will be most helpful to the cause of evangelism. Ask the rest of the class then that observed the encounter to critique the efforts and progress of the students that were pantomiming the roles of evangelizers. Encourage participation of all the students. International students may identify unique insights from their diverse intercultural perspectives. Students often are surprised to discover their words and their body language may have been misperceived. Then discuss how the situations might have been addressed in the conversation and how may this have resulted in a more effective encounter. In this type of session, there's no definitive way of assessing the quote-unquote correct response to the spiritual impulse of others, but this allows exploration and self-reflection. Students often leave the sessions equipped with sharpened perceptions concerning the potential for reaching their peers in the environments with which they best identify. Then, ask for a new set of volunteers and give them a different scenario on a piece of paper to role play. Repeat the above until several students have the opportunity. To conclude today's session, Dr. George Hunter III has stated that it typically takes about 25 to 30 encounters before Americans typically turn to Christ. Evangelism should occur over multiple encounters, possibly with smaller fields of individuals than what may have seemed ideal in previous decades. Doing life together with people in their places of work, their places of play, and social media, rather than hurrying them to points of decision about the gospel, appears to be consistent both with biblical models of hospitality and with the prevalent worldview of American millennials. Role-playing can help prepare students to explore their relational networks and follow up on these bridges of God with the following questions in mind. For the workplace, consider questions like this. What opportunities arise to demonstrate genuine concern for coworkers? Who may be open to meeting for discussions of faith during breaks, such as lunchtime, before work, after work, during travel? How can business concerns such as corporate social responsibility or impact investing become opportunities to express your faith in meaningful ways? Second, in the places where people play, consider questions like, what could you invite people to in order to learn more about them and move them closer to God? These could be events at home or at church or service in the community. Third, in the social media context, ask questions like, how can the church creatively use social media to connect with networks of people with similar affinities? Example may include Facebook tagging, reviewing social media regularly, such as Facebook posts, to learn how to care for people in tension or transition when they're often open and responsive to faith. In addition, consider the creative use of digital media in online contexts, such as podcasts or short video clips, to create interest to relevant concerns of the unchurched or dechurched. Consider videos like the I Am Second little clips. This will be discussed in the next session under technology, which I invite you to next.